I'm Walter, 68 years old, and 4 months ago I found out my daughter had been feeding me rat poison, disguised as blood pressure medicine. My granddaughter's tablet was still logged into the cloud storage, and what I found on it stopped my heart colder than any pill ever could. Before I tell you how I turned that discovery into the trap that ended their freedom forever, let me ask you something, my friends. Has anyone in your own family ever looked you in the eye and lied without so much as a flicker? Stay with me, because you won't believe how this ends. Hit that subscribe button if you believe family should mean something, and let's get into it. For 35 years, I ran a small fleet of long-haul trucks out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I built that business from a single rig I financed on a handshake loan, and by the time I sold it off 2 years ago, I had 11 trucks, 40 employees, and more money than a man who grew up sleeping 3 to a bed ever thought he'd see. My late wife Carol used to tell me I built that company the way other men build cathedrals, brick by brick, mile by mile, never cutting a corner. I believed I'd built my family the same way. I paid for my daughter Vanessa's culinary school. I paid off her husband Marcus's business school loans. I bought them the down payment on their first restaurant. I thought I was building something that would outlast me. Carol passed 8 months ago. Aneurysm, the doctors said. Here in the morning. Gone by lunch. Vanessa and Marcus were at the house that day, helping with errands, they said. By the time I got home from the hardware store, Carol was already gone, and my whole understanding of the world went with her. I grieved the way I imagine most men grieve badly, quietly, alone in the garage where she couldn't hear me. And somewhere in those first weeks, my own health started sliding. My hands developed a tremor. I'd forget why I'd walked into a room. Some mornings the world tilted sideways when I stood up too fast, like the floor itself couldn't be trusted. Vanessa was the one who noticed first. She's a nurse's aide before she became a chef, and she said my blood pressure was probably spiking from the grief and stress. She started bringing over a weekly pill organizer, all 7 days filled with a new prescription she said Carol's old doctor had approved. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my little girl. I used to carry her on my shoulders through the Tulsa State Fair. I walked her down the aisle. I trusted her the way you trust gravity without ever once questioning whether it might fail you. 2 days ago, my granddaughter Emma, she's 9, left her tablet at my house after a sleepover. I picked it up to charge it for her, and the screen lit up, still logged into her mother's shared photo account. Vanessa apparently used the same login for convenience. I wasn't snooping. I want you to understand that. I was just trying to plug in a 9-year-old's iPad. But there, sitting in the recently deleted folder that hadn't fully cleared yet, was a video. 41 seconds long, filmed from a phone propped against the kitchen counter. The same kitchen counter where Vanessa filled my pill organizer every Sunday. I want you to imagine watching your own daughter, in your dead wife's kitchen, crushing a white tablet from an orange pharmacy bottle that wasn't the blood pressure medication she claimed, grinding it into powder with the back of a spoon, talking the whole time not to the camera, but to Marcus, off-screen saying, and I remember every word because I have replayed it in my mind 1,000 times since, slow and steady, babe. The doctor said his heart can't take a spike. We just need him foggy enough that nobody questions the will. The video cut off there. 41 seconds. But 41 seconds was enough to end my entire understanding of my own life. I sat in my truck in Emma's school pickup line for 20 minutes without moving. My hands weren't trembling from any medication then. They were trembling because 35 years of reading contracts, reading men across a negotiating table, reading which drivers were lying about their logbooks. Every instinct I'd built my whole career on was screaming the same thing. My daughter was poisoning me. And if Carol's death had looked exactly like mine was being engineered to look, then maybe, God help me, Carol hadn't just had an aneurysm either. I didn't call the police that afternoon. I want to be honest with you about why. Because some of you watching might think I should have. If I'd walked into the Tulsa Police Department with a 9-second video and no proof of what was actually in those pills, Vanessa's lawyer, and believe me, Marcus's family has lawyers, would have had that video thrown out and me labeled a grieving, unstable old man within a week. I needed more than a video. I needed something no defense attorney on earth could talk their way around. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I decided to keep smiling at my daughter. That evening, when Vanessa came by with my Sunday pill organizer 2 days early, just checking on me, she said. I let her set the little plastic box on my kitchen table exactly like always. I let her hug me at the door and tell me she loved me. And I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as watching the floor of my own house give way beneath me, while I kept a smile plastered on my face. That night, alone, I did something I hadn't done since my trucking days. I got organized. I labeled a manila envelope, "Insurance Renewal," the most boring possible name, and I started documenting. I didn't take the pills. Every single one, I palmed and wrapped in a paper towel and hid in a coffee can in the garage. Within 3 days, I noticed something remarkable. The fog in my head started lifting. My hands stopped shaking. I walked up my porch steps without the world tilting sideways. For the first time in months, I woke up and simply felt like myself. That's when the truth crystallized into something cold and mathematical, the same way I used to look at a balance sheet and see exactly where the money was leaking out. I hadn't been getting old. I hadn't been falling apart from grief. I had been getting poisoned, one careful, patient dose at a time. I drove myself, alone, out to a private toxicology lab 2 counties over, one that handled workplace drug disputes for trucking companies. I still had a contact there from my old business. I handed over 3 of the pills from the coffee can and paid extra to have it expedited quietly. No insurance, no paper trail back to my name. 2 days later, the lab director, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Patel, sat me down in her office and told me the tablets contained a compound called colchicine, a gout medication that in small daily doses causes exactly what I'd been experiencing: tremors, confusion, dizziness, and in slightly larger doses causes fatal cardiac and organ failure that looks, on a standard autopsy, almost identical to natural heart failure in an elderly patient. "Mr. Reyes," she said, and I remember her exact words because they confirmed the worst thing a father can ever hear. "Someone has been very deliberately trying to kill you slowly enough that nobody would ever ask a single question." I asked her, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect, whether this same compound, in a large enough single dose, could kill a perfectly healthy 62-year-old woman in the space of an afternoon. She looked at me for a long moment before she answered. "Yes," she said, "especially if that woman already had a minor undiagnosed heart arrhythmia, the kind that would never show up on a routine physical, but the kind Carol had been quietly managing for 2 years with a prescription only her family knew about." I walked out of that lab and sat in my truck in the parking lot, and I did not cry. I had done all my crying for Carol 8 months ago. Mourning a death I now understood was murder. What I felt instead was a kind of icy clarity I hadn't touched since the worst negotiations of my career, when a supplier tried to squeeze me, and I had exactly 1 shot to turn the whole table around. I called my late wife's brother, my brother-in-law Harold, who spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor before he retired to Bartlesville to fish. I trusted Harold with my life, and now, apparently, I trusted him with my death. I drove out to his cabin that same night, and I laid the toxicology report on his kitchen table next to the 41-second video I'd already transferred off Emma's tablet onto a flash drive. Harold read the lab report twice. He watched the video 4 times. When he finally looked up at me, I saw something in his face I'd never seen in 20 years of Thanksgiving dinners. Pure, controlled fury. The kind of anger that doesn't shout, it plans. "Walter," he said, "if we take this to the local police right now, here's exactly what happens. Vanessa gets a lawyer within the hour. That lawyer argues the video is out of context, that you're a grieving widower who's become paranoid and unstable, and that any prosecution takes 18 months while she stays out on bail, in your daughter's own house, free to disappear, or worse, free to finish what she started before a trial even happens. We are not doing that. We are going to build something they cannot lawyer their way out of." Harold still had contacts at the U.S. Attorney's office from his career, and more importantly, he understood something I didn't, that Vanessa and Marcus's restaurant, the one I'd financed the down payment for, had been bleeding money for 2 years. Marcus had quietly taken out a second mortgage on the building without telling Vanessa, and according to Harold's contact, who did some very unofficial digging, that mortgage was owed to a private lender with a reputation for collecting debts in ways that never involved a courtroom. That was the piece that made my blood run cold in a whole new way. My daughter and her husband weren't just greedy. They were drowning. And drowning people don't ask politely for a life preserver. They take it from whoever is closest. Harold and I spent the next 11 days building what he called, only half joking, a case so clean a jury falls asleep from how obvious it is. We didn't confront them. Instead, I did something that cost me more than any amount of money ever could. I called Vanessa and told her I wanted to finally get my affairs in order, now that I was feeling foggier than ever, and that I wanted to set up a joint checking account with her so she could help manage things while my mind was slipping. I watched her eyes light up with something I used to mistake for concern, and now recognized as pure, undisguised hunger. Harold's contact helped us establish a monitored account, $180,000, a fraction of what I actually had, moved into an account that looked exactly like an unsuspecting old man, quietly handing his daughter the keys to his finances. Every transaction on that account would be flagged and traced the instant it moved anywhere near Marcus's private lender. I didn't have to wait long. 9 days after I opened that account and handed Vanessa the debit card for emergencies, $115,000 moved out of it in a single wire transfer to an account linked, according to federal banking records, directly to that same private lender Marcus owed money to. My daughter had taken the bait meant to save her own husband's neck, using money she believed was the first quiet installment of an inheritance she thought she'd earned by slowly killing her own father. That was the wire fraud. That was the piece Harold said would matter more in a courtroom than even the poison itself, because financial crimes leave a paper trail no defense attorney can spin into grief and confusion. My granddaughter Emma's 10th birthday party was scheduled for that Saturday at the same restaurant Vanessa and Marcus owned, a rustic little place downtown called the Copper Spoon, the one I'd helped them open with money I'd earned driving trucks through Oklahoma winters at 4 in the morning. 40 guests, family, neighbors. A few of Marcus's business associates I now understood were likely connected to the very people he owed money to. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that Saturday morning, and I did something I hadn't done in 8 months. I stood up straight. I hadn't realized how much I'd let my shoulders curve inward, how much I'd let myself shuffle and mumble and play the part of a man losing his grip, until I finally let it go and looked at my own reflection standing tall again. I put on the same charcoal suit I'd worn to Carol's funeral, because I wanted her with me for this. I arrived early and found the restaurant's back office, where I knew Marcus kept the small projector system they used for slideshows during private events. I'd helped him install that very system myself 2 years ago, back when I still believed I was helping build something good. I plugged in a flash drive Harold had prepared. On it, the 41-second video from Emma's tablet, restored to its full, clear resolution, and beneath it, spliced together by a forensic technician Harold had hired, 22 additional seconds. The tablet's cloud backup had preserved that Vanessa never knew existed footage of her and Marcus 3 days after Carol's funeral, sitting at that same kitchen counter, Marcus saying, on camera, in his own voice, "Your mom went fast. Too fast, maybe. Let's take our time with your dad. Slower is safer. Too fast, maybe." I sat through the birthday cake, through Happy Birthday sung slightly off-key by 40 people who loved my granddaughter and had no idea what her parents had done, through Vanessa's toast about family being everything. I clapped along with everyone else. I hugged my daughter, and when the moment came for the slideshow of Emma's baby pictures that Vanessa had prepared, I quietly stepped into the back office, and, instead of the flash drive with the baby pictures, I inserted the one Harold had prepared. The screen flickered to life above the restaurant's main dining room, and 40 guests turned their chairs toward what they expected would be pictures of a laughing baby in a high chair. Instead, the room went completely silent as my daughter's own voice, magnified through the restaurant's sound system, filled the space. "Slow and steady, babe. The doctor said his heart can't take a spike. We just need him foggy enough that nobody questions the will." Then Marcus's voice, cold and clear. "Your mom went fast. Too fast, maybe. Let's take our time with your dad. Slower is safer." I watched 40 faces turn, one by one, from confusion to horror. I watched Vanessa's fork clatter onto her plate. I watched Marcus's face drain of every drop of color it had. I watched my own granddaughter, 10 years old, look up at her mother with an expression I hope to God she never has to make again in her life. I walked to the front of the room, past the frozen guests, and I picked up the microphone the restaurant used for toasts. My voice did not shake. 8 months ago, I said, my wife Carol died suddenly of what everyone told me was a heart condition. 4 days ago, I found out my own daughter has been slowly poisoning me the same way, waiting for my heart to give out quietly enough that nobody would ever ask a single question. What you just heard was not an accident. It was a confession, recorded by their own daughter's tablet, in their own kitchen. I held up the toxicology report, the same report Dr. Patel had signed 2 counties over. This is an independent lab analysis confirming the exact poison found in the pills my daughter has been giving me every week for the past 4 months. The restaurant's front door opened at that exact moment, right on Harold's cue, and 2 officers from the Tulsa Police Financial Crimes Unit walked in alongside a federal agent. Harold's old contact had brought in once the wire fraud crossed state lines. I had insisted, and Harold had agreed completely, that this time the police came first, before anything else, because the poisoning alone deserved exactly that kind of immediate, undeniable justice. No more waiting, no more traps, just handcuffs in front of every person who loved my granddaughter and needed to see the truth with their own eyes. Marcus tried to run for the kitchen doors. He didn't make it past the second table. Vanessa didn't run at all. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at me with an expression that shifted, in the space of about 4 seconds, from disbelief to something that finally looked like fear. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "I can explain." "You don't get to call me that right now," I said, and I meant it more completely than I have ever meant anything in my life. The officers read them both their rights in front of 40 stunned guests, in front of a birthday cake with 10 unlit candles still sitting untouched on the table, in front of a little girl who would need years of counseling to understand what her own parents had almost done. Vanessa was charged with attempted murder and federal wire fraud. Marcus was charged as a co-conspirator on both counts, along with a separate federal investigation into his private lender that, according to Harold, eventually connected to a much larger financial crimes case involving 3 other victims across 2 states. The trial 6 months later was swift. The colchicine in the pills, the video, the bank records showing the wire transfer moving directly toward Marcus's debt. There was no defense attorney clever enough to talk a jury out of what they'd both said in their own voices, in their own kitchen, on camera. Vanessa received 22 years. Marcus received 28, with the additional federal fraud charges stacked on top. I was granted full emergency guardianship of Emma. She lives with me now, in the same house where her grandmother raised her mother, in the same kitchen where the truth finally surfaced on a 9-year-old's forgotten tablet. Some nights she still wakes up asking questions I don't have easy answers for. I tell her the truth, gently, a little more each year, as she's ready to carry it. I tell her that love isn't supposed to come with a price tag, and that money can turn even the people who held you as a baby into strangers if you let it. I used a portion of what remained of my estate to establish a scholarship at the same culinary school Vanessa once attended, in Carol's name, for young people who need a second chance at building something honest. It felt like the only way to take back what greed had tried to twist into something ugly. I still drive out to Harold's cabin most Sundays. We don't talk much about that night at the Copper Spoon anymore. We mostly just fish, and watch Emma chase dragonflies along the creek and let the quiet mean something good again. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you the same question I've been asking myself every day since. How well do you really know the people sitting across your own dinner table? Trust is the most valuable thing we hand out in this life, and the hardest lesson I ever learned is that it should never, ever be handed out blindly, not even to the people who share your blood and your last name. If this story moved you, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and never, ever stop trusting your own instincts, even when the people closest to you are begging you not to.